Hey everybody, and welcome to the Worship Leader Toolbox Podcast. We are so thankful to have you here, and we just know that this episode number 129, it'll be a game changer for living into the values of your worship team. It's our goal to help equip and encourage the local church worship team, and we welcome you to the Worship Leader Toolbox. How you doing, Tim Price?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been a great day. Had a lot of stuff happening with the break week last week, and my daughter going back to school, and took a little family trip, and just had all kinds of squeezing a lot of stuff. But it's been great, and praise the Lord for that. How about you? How's things going for you?
Oh, it's great. I love Thanksgiving. It's my favorite holiday, my favorite time of the year. Not only because I love to eat, but because I love the family time, and doesn't just seem quite as hectic as Christmas. You know, it just seems a little more relaxed, but everybody gets together and has a good time, and lots of food, lots of football, and lots of family. So it's my favorite time.
Yeah, that's cool. And it when it's this close to Christmas, though, it definitely kind of bleeds together fast.
It does. Yeah, before
all
we
of a
know
sudden,
it.
boom, Christmas decorations.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I
That's
went out
good.
of town last weekend.
I like the holiday too.
I
That's
came back home from out of town last weekend, and Christmas had thrown up in our house for sure. So, absolutely.
That's cool. What were you doing out of town?
Well, I went out to Eastern Kentucky to I helped promote a bluegrass concert or an event out there at a beautiful theater out there called the Mountain Arts Center in Prestonsburg, Kentucky. And it was a fundraiser event to raise money for the Hurricane Helene victims in western North Carolina. The bluegrass music scene is heavily steeped in western North Carolina, and lots of professional singers and people from the industry live there. So we went out there, raised money for a one-night event, had lots of famous people in the bluegrass music world out there, and were able to have a great night. And we raised $11,000 for those victims, so it was exciting. So,
wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. We're doing it again this Friday night in western Kentucky. So we went from one end of the state to the other, and this Friday we're doing another fundraiser at the Kentucky Opry around Kentucky Lake area, and having something similar. So we're hoping for similar results, hopefully. So
that's cool. Well, that's great. That's a big need.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of gone out of the media, but it's still a major need for those people that were so devastated by that hurricane. So,
It's good you could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get right into our topic today, values and how they guide the worship team.
Yeah, I heard a quote that kind of propelled this post, and that was, the quote was, "When your values are clear, your choices are easy."
Ooh, that's good.
And so for a worship ministry, there are some choices, obviously, but more it's about what your values are. And too often I could see, including myself, that you get in situations where you're not really exactly sure why you're doing what you're doing. And so the first step really is to determine your values. And if you haven't done this before, it might be a little more complicated than it sounds, because in some ways we all have values that we're operating under, whether we have named them or not. And so before we can highlight them or live into them more or change them if necessary, you really have to name them, and they have to be known to you. And so this might be putting you on the spot, Tim, but can you articulate any of the values that you operate with in your worship ministry or media ministry in any way?
Well,
and if you can't, that's fine too, because it's not always easy.
Yeah, it's definitely on the spot question, but I think some obvious choices come to mind, especially when you're dealing with church media, church ministry. Is always put Christ first and then the center. Always begin each meeting and service and practice and everything with prayer, and just try to give it up to the Lord and follow His direction. I would think do everything, with kindness and love and professionalism. And those are mainly the kind of immediate values that I've always tried to live by, especially in life, but also in ministry.
Yeah, that's good. Put Christ first and pray before everything, and kindness, love, and professionalism. That's a great list.
Yep. Thank you.
So you came up with those pretty quickly. Is that anything that you have written down, or is that just sort of standard
No, it's not
embedded?
Yeah, it's not written down. Unfortunately, I probably should. So be sure and send me that after we're done, so I can have a list of it. but yeah, that's just kind of what's in my heart and in my mind. So I think that's, if you start there, that's probably a good place to start. So
Yeah, those are like good blanket ones, and probably people listening would probably wonder, how do you determine those values, or what is the step, and basically it requires effort in a sense to get the ball rolling officially. And I don't subscribe to the idea that we have to have these, like, put on a huge plaque and put somewhere backstage or something like that. This is more like you just want to have these to be known, things you can work on. I remember hearing one time one of the big motel chains actually had 11 things they wanted their people to live and breathe. And those 11 things they would bring up at their weekly meeting with all the employees. And they would do that for 11 weeks. And then they would start back at the top and start with topic number 1 again. And they would do that for another 11 weeks. And they just kept that on repeat every single week. They would talk about one of the 11 main topics that they wanted their people to live and breathe. And so just the idea of articulating these, writing them down, can make a difference in your ministry. And what you do is you jump in, you name some values that fit, that you already have or that you want to have. You just start living into it, and then you can always tweak it. This isn't like, gospel. This is just ways to help people serve well and behave well and to love well and all those things. You kind of begin to understand your values while you are on the journey.
Absolutely.
So a couple of those you threw out are some good ones as well. Here's a thought, though, and I wrote this down because I just thought it was interesting. But when you Google values for big companies, two of the bigger companies that everybody knows popped up, Google and Apple. And Google does have 3 values according to this website. And the 3 are respect the user, respect the opportunity, and respect each other. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. Apple has a series of like 6 of them: accessibility, education, environment, privacy, supplier responsibility, and all these things. And I'm not saying that the church has to become like Apple or Google. I'm just saying that even large organizations, as well as small organizations, have to have values that if they're going to live into them, they have to articulate them and put them in place so that people can start doing that. And so that's kind of just a little bit of fodder for thinking about this whole topic.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, everybody, I mean, at the very least, needs to have, whether you have a list of values or a big list, like you mentioned, or just a simple mission statement, can sometimes be explain your values as well, and I think that's
definitely
a good place to start. So,
Yep.
so in this post, Tim, you shared the 4 values that ministry tries to uphold. The first one is excellence.
Yeah, and these are 4 that. And what's hilarious is, as I was writing this, I realized several years back I also wrote down 4 things that our worship team needs to do, and they were different than these 4. So I don't know if I've changed or what the deal is, but I imagine there's hundreds to pick from, and so this is just a list for today of like 4 values that a worship ministry could cling to, and the first one, as you mentioned, is excellence. And so in our ministry, we kind of strive to live by this definition of excellence, and that is doing the best with what you have. And I love that definition. It's from a guy named Jason Hatley who lives down in Florida. And the reason that I love that one is because that applies to churches that are small and medium and large.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no way we can compare ourselves to every church and ministry, but we do need to strive to be great stewards of the people and the resources and the creativity and the talent that we have in our church right now. And so every church can be excellent in the basics like prayer and preparation, worship planning, punctuality, correct chords, lyrics, and projection, and great Sunday worship times. But we also want to, be as excellent as we can in some of the things that are like icing, like staging and production, video, photography, all the stuff that we think about,
Mm-hmm.
and developing people and all those things. And so excellence is kind of sometimes a double-edged sword, because at times I feel like I want to, kind of push against excellence and say, hey, it's not about just having everything perfect. But in another sense, we also are worshiping an amazing, awe-inspiring God. And so the most that we can do to make worship the best possible with what we have is really our goal. And so we want to put that into practice and strive to do that best we can.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because sometimes I personally even lose sight of what is excellence, because I've been in all size churches, and I've seen it all. And so sometimes in my mind, I lose focus on maybe what I think in my mind excellence might be, this big production or a big, worship team and praise band and the whole thing. And for example, I've mentioned before that I'm filling in right now on the interim leading music at a small little Baptist church in Western Kentucky, and it's just me and a guitar. So, it's literally the other end of the spectrum. So sometimes I feel defeated, but I got to remember, like you said, we're there to worship the Almighty God and the creator of the universe. And so, how we do it in excellence is just as important as how Elevation Church does it. So,
yeah, I mean, that's what's really weird about worship, is that you can be in Africa under a tree in a church that doesn't even have a building, or you can be in a humongous, we talked about a couple churches before we got on the podcast this morning, and both of those have like, not merit, that's the wrong word, but both those have possibility of being authentic worship to God. And so, some of those things that when we kind of compare, we kind of lose our joy for doing it. And then the worst comment, or not the worst, a comment that is not good for, or an attitude that's not good for the church worship team to have, is it's good enough for the church. And so one of the motivators for excellence is it needs to be great. It needs to be amazing as possible, because it is the church and it's the eternal thing. And so we want to, elevate as much as we can things that are going to be great and creative and all that.
And in that, I want to mention too that sometimes you got to strive to make yourself as excellent as you can be in professionalism, and if you can make yourself better, then so be it, but sometimes where do you draw the line in how much more things you bring to a church in your mind? If you think a full band and a full choir and all these things will make you more excellent, well, do you strive to make that happen, or do you not? So there's such a line.
Yeah, drawing the line of what is over the top or something.
Right, exactly.
You want to be, you definitely want to match the church. I've always think that in terms of websites. These days, with the ease of creating websites, sometimes you have this unbelievably slick website and you show up to the church and it's kind of just barely there.
Right.
Or in the old days, it was more painful. The church was on fire, healthy and alive. You look at their website, it looks like they haven't touched it in 5 years. And so that's that kind of question. But you want it to match. And when I've traveled, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but when I've traveled before and have, invited our band to come, and then all of a sudden at the last possible minute, somebody gets sick or can't make it, or there's scheduling conflict or whatever, and all of a sudden we don't have a drummer, and we got to take the bass player and have him play cajon. Everything is like less than I wanted it to be. And then it's amazing how often it works out that group and the way the instrumentation went matched the energy of the congregation that night and the inputs they had in their soundboard anyway, and a whole bunch of other things that I would never been able to plan for. And so I think it's, I don't know the answer to the question where you draw the line, but I think as much as you can do with the gifts of the people that are at that church, that's part of what the worship leader does, is help pull out the gifts of the people that are there. And every church has kind of what they need at that moment to help make things excellent.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, let's move on to number 2, which is a singing church.
And I'm sure we've already mentioned this somewhere on the podcast, but one value of any worship team should be to develop a singing church. And if your church isn't singing, then you almost need to rethink the definition of a worship leading team, because the whole goal is for the people to be engaged in singing and some other potential, creative ways of responding to God's presence and giving him glory. But this value, if you have this value, what it does is help you answer questions about how your ministry is going. So if you're thinking about your church being a singing church, it answers questions about the volume of the sound. Can people hear themselves sing, or can they, or is the volume loud enough for them to sing confidently? Lyric projection's a big thing for that. The right words at the right time, at the right pace. Stage volume's a big deal. You get in the right kind of churches, and all of a sudden, if they don't have mic'd drums in a cage, drums and the volume of that is always a battle. And it just seems like it's hard to say, hey, play quieter, because drummers don't really respond to that great. But if the goal is a singing church, then everybody has to work together to make the volume adapted to the fact that the church needs to be able to be singing, and stage presence and a whole bunch of other stuff. So the self-critique of your ministry leadership is much easier when you have the value of, hey, one of our priorities is for our church to sing. How are we going to do that? How are we going to make that happen?
Yes.
And so that's all a part of that, answering that question.
Yeah, that's so good. Singing church is, I think, so important to so many people because I know for me it helps. The music is what really helps me prepare my heart for worship and what message the pastor has. And and just when you think sometimes it's really not flowing, or as a worship leader, it just didn't feel right for me. And then after church, someone will totally blow that out of the water by saying, "Oh my gosh, that was so great. I love, I love your song choices, that whatever." And it's like, oh, okay, well, that proves that it's not about me.
Yeah. And it's, and music, even though sometimes in our modern day where people have, almost equated, it's almost the same word. It's almost a synonym, music and worship. And that's not necessarily the case, but music has been a part of the kingdom work and the church's work ever since like the tabernacle days in Leviticus. And there were people that were dedicated solely to music. And there's one phrase, I have to look it up now, but there's a phrase where a group of one of the tribes was in charge of music in the tabernacle day and night. And I've always just thought that was a neat phrase, that there was just always music going on for festivals and special events. And so the church singing. And another little example of that idea that the church needs to sing is, I heard somebody say once that John Wesley had preached thousands and thousands of sermons, and his brother Charles Wesley had written hundreds of hymns. And nobody can quote any sermons, but everybody knows a Charles Wesley hymn because he wrote "Hark the Herald Angels Sing" for one thing. And so music has a powerful way of reaching deeper.
Absolutely.
And still need sermons, but it's a big part of the church.
Yep, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, number 3 is people focused.
Yeah, this could go a couple different ways, I know, but the value of people focused helps us lead people well. And we see our team for who they are, not just volunteers, but living out their gifts and calling. And we really want to empower people in our teams for their ministry and not just ours. So we seek to develop them with tools to learn their parts. And, I'm talking about the praise band here, but learn their parts, learn their stuff, and just to make sure that they know about the rehearsal times and what's going to be happening, and being together at times for prayer and community stuff outside of the Sunday sound check-in rush and all the stuff we have to do. But when we have a value of people focused, we spend time with them as our team members, but also with the church as a whole, not just stuck in the back before and after worship, but make time to connect. I think we talked about that a couple episodes ago too. But we don't pick on our church. That's another thing about being people focused. We don't want to make it seem like we are talking bad about our congregation, but it's most likely that our congregation, if they don't feel like they're a singing congregation or an engaging group, or if they're not, worried about trying to be excellent in hospitality and preaching and other aspects of ministry, it's possible that they just need more teaching and more encouragement and more modeling from us, which goes back to what you were saying a minute ago, that some of it is just us getting better as leaders and learning what we can and trusting God's Spirit to work in us and serve in that way. And there's probably other stuff about being people focused, but a big thing is that, of course, our lives and our ministry is primarily Jesus focused, but we model his intense focus on people. And so as a minister of the gospel in worship ministry, we are also going to be like Jesus and focus on people and talk to people, find out how they're doing, think about how the ministry is going, plan community times and prayer circles and training. All those things are important as we have the value of taking part in ministry with others and being focused on them.
Absolutely.
That's a practical part of all that.
That's for sure. We have to be people focused. Jesus commanded to love him first, but then love people second. And so without that, ministry doesn't go very far, and especially worship is hard to do if you're not caring about the people that you're trying to lead into worship. So
that's true. And that also gets back to the idea that excellence is still important, but relationships carry a lot of weight in that. And so I've always known that at summer camps, we're throwing songs together that the preacher that we never met before requests right before, service that afternoon. And, that would never fly on a Sunday morning, but for whatever reason, because we've sat around with these people at camp for, last 4 days and eaten meals with them and talked and visited and carried on, there's a lot of grace as we're serving and singing because there's a huge relationship factor there. And there's also a little theory about why kids often will be the special music or the Christmas kids pageant at a smaller church as opposed to a larger church. Because at a smaller church, some little kid gets up there to play piano for a special song. Everybody knows that kid. They know their parents. Half of them are related. The grandparents are there. Everybody's all excited. And the encouragement is there because of the relationship more than the need for humongous talent.
Right.
And that's a little part of that too. But
oh, absolutely.
It is interesting.
I grew up in a small country church here in Kentucky where it was not uncommon for the music to be over and the preacher get ready to preach, and somebody says, hey, so-and-so, won't you get up and sing a song? So it's all about just being in relationship with the people and loving each other, and makes a big difference. So,
and I heard most pastors and leaders come from small churches because in small churches you have more opportunity to serve and lead.
Mm-hmm.
And in larger churches, it's not 100% true, obviously, because the larger churches you have opportunity for more planned intern programs and experience and that kind of stuff, leadership training. But it is true that a huge number of church leaders come from churches where they were nurtured by throwing them in because everybody, for one, needed them, and two, everybody was happy to have them serve.
Right.
So that's kind of a unique aspect to the benefit of smaller churches.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to our fourth and final point, which is humble leadership.
Yeah, this humble leadership is probably something that self-explanatory in a lot of ways. And the idea is that we are putting our trust and hope and ministry in the hands of Jesus. And that keeps us from taking ourselves too seriously. It helps us know that ministry on stage amounts to being a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord. And though worship ministry is visible, whether you're a guitar player leading on your own or you got a whole band, everybody usually knows the worship leader. It's probably the second most visible role in the church outside of the pastor. And our ministry in the church, though, is similar to somebody who is helping with the donuts or hospitality or nursery. We're just part of the overall aspect to serving in the kingdom work, being the church and the light in the region that we're in. And so we just kind of have to understand that. But another aspect to the humility is that we submit to higher standards because we are more visible, maybe because we are in front. And so, rules and things, and I'd be happy to hear what you think about this, but things like what you post on social media or the fact that we willingly hold ourselves to higher standards because, what people see, how we live in relationships, how we're growing in faith, what kind of things we're sharing with people. All those things help whenever the person who is in leadership is humble and teachable. Because if you approach somebody about how they're living their life or what they're posting on social media and they're not humble, then all of a sudden fireworks happen because they're upset about that. So we understand that not everybody's perfect, but we just trust that God's going to, work in our weakness. So
right, absolutely.
And so that's the weird. the question kind of got muddled in there, but the idea of worship team members being held to a higher standard, if that doesn't come in humility, that really wreaks havoc on a lot of things.
I totally agree. In my opinion, one of the probably the first characteristic that any leader should have would be to be humble. And there's a lot of other great characteristics, obviously, that goes with great leaders, but it's a lot easier to follow a humble leader than a leader who is not. So
yeah,
but that's a great
and there's probably some kind of 2x2 quadrant for this, but the best combination is gifted, skilled, and humble. And then you have people who are teachable, but they may not have all the skill. Well, that's probably second best, because it's kind of nice to be able to say, oh yeah, here's how you do this, and they're like, oh, okay, good. They're quick learners or whatever. And then the third, I guess, quadrant, the third worst would be the person who is skilled but isn't humble, and that's a tough situation. But I guess the worst would be the unskilled person who's also not humble.
Yeah, absolutely. That would
wreak a lot of havoc.
That'd be a tough nut to crack there, that's for sure. Oh man, well this has been a great list of things, and so simple. I mean, excellence, a singing church, a church that's people focused, and one that has humble leadership. So that's some great points. So what do you think a church leader should do to get the ball rolling on these things?
Yeah, I think, well, on our blog post, there's a few more practical thoughts. We probably don't have time to go through all of them now, but one of the things is just to start with prayer and just get a pencil and paper and write down 10, 6, 5 things, whatever you can come up with, of values that you notice in your group, your ministry team, and those you're leading worship with, or some values that you would love for them to have. And I don't mean to harp on this one, but an example is punctuality. If that's a value for your team, to be on time and to show each other that kind of respect, that might be something you want to write down just to begin to share. And that may fall in more of a category of expectation, but it could be a value that we treat each other well by doing this. Then from there, with that list, I would suggest next step would just be to get together with 3 or 4 key people from your group and get that list kind of, solidified, see if people agree, see what it might look like, prioritize the list. What's the most important of all these? What's second, third, fourth, or fifth, and whatever number you have. And then I would just print them somewhere, put them on paper, send them in an email, just tell people, maybe at the start of a new season or a new year, and just say something like, hey, these are some of the values that we want to live into. Some of these you're doing great on, and we're all doing great on, and some of them we haven't even thought about before, but this is going to be what we're going to do. So once you start communicating them, then it's going to start adding motivation and inspiration to your team. And that's probably the first 2 or 3 steps.
Absolutely. All great ideas for sure. And we just want to encourage you to be sure and make that list. And I think if I'm making a list, punctuality is definitely going to be one of my first ones. I'm just a pet peeve about that. I don't know why, but anyway. But yeah, don't get me started on that one. But anyway, all great points for sure. So, well, man, this has all been great. Such a great time with you today, Tim, and a great podcast. And I hope folks have been blessed from that. If you want to learn more, check out the blog post at worshipleadertoolbox.com. Man, thanks for the great conversation. I love doing this podcast with you. It's so fun. And I hope people get a blessing out of it, because I know I do each and every time. So
yeah,
just remember, we're praying for you, and we're praying for your ministry. We're praying for your church, and most of all, we're praying for your heart. So we love you, and we appreciate you listening, and we will see you next time on the Worship Leader Toolbox Podcast. Thanks, everybody.